Better be.
Oh, and we are live. Awesome. Hey, guys, everybody, welcome to another edition of Fearless Friday with Lisa. It's going to be a really cool deja vu today because we have Tom Bancroft highlighted today. Hey, welcome to the show, Tom.
Hi, Lisa. Good to see you, cousin.
Good to see you, cousin. So you guys, if you saw the interview with Tony Bancroft, that's Tom's twin brother, it looks like a deja vu, but there really are two amazing Bancrofts. Well, actually, there's three if you want to include Cammie.
Yeah, there's more than that.
There's more than
I
that.
have kids, that he has kids. We'll count them too. They're incredible.
All right. But only two are identical.
That's right. Well, I have identical twins too, but
and they are, but are they identical? Not as identical as you and Tony.
Well, technically, you have to have a blood test nowadays to really know if somebody's identical or fraternal. So it's a long story.
It's a long story. Well, we're thrilled to have you highlighted today, Tom. And, I ask every single guest the question, what was the fear? And what was your process of breaking through that fear? So kind of share a little bit about your background and how you got into Disney animation, the fear around that, because I know that was like at 19 years old. Like literally you got your dream job at 19 years old. And then the choice, you and Jennifer and the family, to move forward or leave that sweet spot and create another sweet spot. So I'm just going to let you share, Tom, your story, the fear, and what was the process of breaking through it?
There's probably 3 or 4 points of fear and major change in our lives. Probably at least 4. I'm probably going to spotlight 2 of them partially because Tony, I know, already probably shared, we overlap, our stories overlap so much that not only because we're twins, but because we both were Disney animators, I don't want to kind of tell some of the same stories. So, but to answer your question, we, at an early age, of course, Tony and I were drawing since we were tiny, and we'd go to your house and visit on vacation, and we would just copy drawings from Mad Magazine that your brothers had hidden away, and other magazines. And we would just draw all the time. And that was what was fun to us. And we would compete with each other. And at first it was a healthy competition. And so this is kind of one of my points, is that there came a point where Tony and I had to separate. And we had to not only physically separate later on, but creatively. And we didn't know it at the time, but I think we were, like the Bible says, iron sharpens iron. Tony and I really were that for each other when we were young. And we would constantly be like, hey, did you see this? And this was pre-internet. So we had to sort of discover artists through books and go into the library and things like that. And we would show each other what we really were into at that time. And basically everything was the same. We just loved all the same artists, all the same things. It was Norman Rockwell all the way to Charles Schultz, who did the Peanuts comic strip. And then so we did comic strips all through high school and things like that. But then, of course, in high school, that was our first separation. I met a girl, Jennifer, and she was my senior sweetheart in high school. And that was our first separation, where I started going out with her, and we'd go to the movies, me and her, not me and Tony anymore, and because we used to do everything together. And that was sort of the first moments of that. We still lived together. We still shared a bedroom, but that little bit of separation in time, and emotional separation too, was hard at first, but we started realizing it was a good thing. Then later on, he got a girlfriend and things like that. And so that led to us then actually me getting married and really separating. At that point we were working, but we were still working together at Disney. So we'd see each other during the day, but I had a wife and I was now living with her. We had moved to Florida. I think Tony kind of told the whole journey of getting from Cal Arts, where we went to school, California Institute of the Arts, to only a year and a half in getting an internship at Disney. And that internship was, and this was back in 1988, end of 88, beginning of 89, it was to open the new Florida animation studio at Disney MGM Studios. And that was a whirlwind, and there was big gambles involved in that. And because Tony went into that, I think I don't really want to go into it as much, but obviously that was a huge life change. but one that almost had very little, I will say this, in an odd way, it had very little fear in it because there was so much excitement involved, and sometimes that happens where the excitement of, I'm just going to do it. And then if it happens and, I won't expect it, but, if it happened, and it happened. And then like in 1 year, I bought a new car, a new house, I got married and started a new job. I mean, they're supposed to be all the most stressful things in your life that could give you a heart attack. Doctors say, all four of those things happened. And then, years later had babies. That would have been the fifth, but we did all four of those in 1 year, but they were so exciting. And we were young, and I'm starting this new life with this woman I love. And my brother's still with me. He'd come to Disney also. And we were both working together at Disney for that first year. And so that first year was just full of excitement, and there were challenges, but I don't remember ever kind of questioning, could I do it? I was just working super hard to do it, and it wasn't till later, that the bigger challenges kind of hit, because I think that we kind of fell into Disney, and in a way, looking back, it was actually very easy to get in for us. And we tell these stories and people are like, wow, how fortunate you were to be perfect timing, and they needed people for, and yeah, there is that. But I think also we had, like I said earlier on, we had sharpened each other. We'd gotten to the point where artistically we were kind of above, the average, CalArts student. We stuck out. And so we were able to get that job probably, at a lot younger age than most people did. Most people did kind of start Disney in their mid 20s to late, early 30s, and even older than that. But, we were blessed to kind of make that transition very early because we had kind of competed with each other. And then about the time we got to Disney, that competition got a little bit more negative, and the separation actually, I really feel like, was a God thing. So Tony ended up moving back after the first year in Florida. He got engaged to Renee, his wife, and he went back to the California Disney studio, and I stayed because Jen and me had gotten married, and we were building a life in Florida, and we were very happy in Florida. And so I stayed in the Florida studio. So from that point on, our Disney careers were separated by about 3,000 miles. But we were still working on some of the same movies. and so on Lion King, he did Pumbaa, and I did Young Simba. And so that was great to still have that in common. But now we were sort of making our own careers, I guess you could say. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yes, you did. So it's interesting. Oops. It's interesting too, because a lot of people, well, they don't have a twin, but maybe they have a best friend, Tom, or maybe they have, a client or rather a colleague that they're hanging out with. And I love that scripture verse about iron sharpens iron. So maybe that's actually one of the first callings, one of the first challenges we can share with the listeners and viewers is, who are you hanging out with? Because who you hang out with is who you become. And you want to surround yourself with people who challenge you and expand you and actually push you. And that's what you created when you got that job at Disney, especially. So you had your brother to sharpen the sword, and then you were surrounded by these just genius, brilliant innovators. Yeah. So talk a little bit about, I don't know if that was any fear for you that they were probably better than you. Is that fair to say? Or at least challenged you in your career, and how important is that for how good you can get as an animator, as an entrepreneur?
I mean, I ended up being at Disney for about 12 years, all total. The first half or more of that was all about mentorship. Everybody, and I have said ever since then, I don't ever want to be the best in the room, because if you're the best in the room, you're not learning from anybody. And I now teach. I started up a program here in Nashville at Lipscomb University, the animation program. And so, obviously, in that scenario, I kind of need to be the best in the room. I think the students want that at that point. But at Disney, especially at that young age, No, I was not. Yeah, it was extremely intimidating. I ended up
Mhm.
becoming the assistant to Marken. Marken created Jasmine. He created Young Simba. He was the guy at the time, especially in the Florida studio. But he's probably one of the top 5 animators in the world, if not top 3.
Mm.
And I was his assistant when my very first job right out of school. And so that came with a ton of intimidation. And
Yeah.
I kind of played it off. I just sort of like became friends with him and kind of got a casual relationship, and I joke with him and things like that. But all the time, I'm really in awe, of everything he does and
Yeah.
says.
Yeah,
And I just,
truly. So let's stop right there, because I
yeah.
call that a context to come from. That's a
Mhm.
context to come from. So the context you came from is it's normal to surround yourself with people who are better than you. That's what you
Very,
want.
very much.
So we want to challenge our listeners and viewers to create that context, because you guys, that's a mindset. That's you giving yourself permission to say, you know what? It's okay to be uncomfortable. It's okay not to be the smartest, the best, the most talented in the room or on the staff. And you want that. So
Mhm.
that's a context to come from that I don't want to skip over, because you were wired that way. So of course you would attract that and actually feel, intimidated, but you're okay with that intimidation because that's who you are, to surround yourself with people who are, let's just say, better than you.
Well, and I think that, and there's the other side of that context, I guess, is that later on in life, I knew that I would become that mentor to other people.
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so I didn't think about it at that time. All I thought about was learning and trying to do my best. And
Mm-hmm.
just like, we watch ER all the time. We're kind of going through Hulu, and my wife and I watch an ER, and it's all about these, residents that are training underneath these doctors, and they get belittled all the time. And that's kind of part of the drama.
Yeah.
But they look up to those doctors, and like every new procedure that they get to do is exciting to them, one doctor did a spinal tap for the first time, and he's like, oh, I did it, and that's it's very much craftsmanship, any kind of craftsmanship, and that's what animation was, especially in those days, but still is today, even with computers, is that kind of thing where it's very old school mentorship mentality, where you need to really learn from the best and train underneath them for many years. And in my case, it was almost 10 years.
Wow.
Walt Disney
And
himself.
seek that.
Yeah.
Seek that. So whether you're a tennis player, you don't want to be the A player. You want to be the aspiring A player. Or if you're an A player, you want to be playing tennis with A plus players. Like, seek that out, you guys. That's our first thought of this interview is, are you seeking out those people that you surround yourself with that challenge you intellectually, that challenge you spiritually, that challenge you in your craft, that challenge you in your hobbies? Beautiful.
Yeah. And so that was natural for me too, because I had a twin brother that did the same thing I did. And we trained each other for, in our early years, transitioning to that being now Marcan. It was in some ways less scary, in other ways very scary, because he was not my brother. He was this legend even at that point in his career. So, but yeah, I do strongly agree that there are those incredible people that they come up and they almost don't need anybody, it seemingly, and they are geniuses, right off the bat. And I knew a couple, even at Cal Arts and things like that. But I'm happy to not have the pride of going, you know what, that should have been me,
Yeah.
I'm happy to go, no, that's great for that person, but that isn't me. I am somebody that needs to work hard and learn from mistakes and make mistakes, and not everything is going to go perfect. Although I know a lot of people online, they look at my career and they think everything went right and I didn't have to work hard and all that.
Yeah.
That's deceptive.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that, the decision you and Jennifer, you and your family made to leave Disney. And I'm sure there was a lot of fear there. What was the fear? What was your process of breaking through that fear to actually leave something that's a sweet spot, that's relatively comfortable and good money? What was that like?
I've made a few decisions like that in my career, but this was one of the first and probably the hardest. And I am a man of faith. I believe in Christ, and I this decision, and I'm trying to tell this story, the short version, because it can get long, but the short version is I had gotten to the point in my career. So this is sort of fast forwarding almost 10 years into my career. Now I had worked my way up at Disney, and I was now a supervising animator. So when Tony, if you watched his interview, became a director of Mulan, and that was his big life change. I had that same moment in Mulan too. That's why for our families, the Bancrofts, Mulan is such a special movie for us because that was when I became supervising animator of Mushu. So Mushu the Dragon, and he was
Mushu
by Eddie Murphy, and it was a real trial by fire. I got thrust into a position where I was now Mark Kent, my mentor. And actually I was now a peer to him and working with him on scenes where he animated Mulan, the star, and I animated Mushu, the other star. At least I said.
Of course.
but they both had a lot of screen time, and of course Eddie Murphy did the voice for Mushu. He's probably the biggest star in the film at the time, voice actor anyway, and so a lot of heat got on me, a lot from all the way to the top, and that's sort of a whole nother story of that was one of those challenge moments in my life where I had to decide. There was a point very early on, I'll tell a little bit of this story. There was a point very early on in Mulan. I was one of the first animators to get on the film. Actually, I was on the film before Tony was. And I was developing some of the characters. But at a certain point, they said, okay, you're going to do Mushu. And at that time in the story, he was a smaller character. He was kind of this sidekick. But as the story changed and got rewritten and storyboards were added, and then, of course, once Eddie Murphy came in and became the voice, because that was a little bit later, he grew and just became this, more than a sidekick to Mulan. He was a bigger part of the film. Yeah. And because of that, I had a lot more work and a lot more heat on me, all the way from the president of Walt Disney Animation. It went all the way to the top. And then at that point, they were like, can Tom do this? This is his first time supervising. Is this really the guy for this kind of a character that's going to be merchandised and make us billions of dollars later on. And so I had to really kind of buckle down because I got warned, basically. They came from on top, and Tony and Barry, the two directors, they came to me and they said, look, this just became kind of real. This is like a big deal. And normally this would be done by a very seasoned supervising animator. You are not that. This is your first time out as a supervising animator where you're designing the character, having to mentor other, like 5 or 6 other animators on animating Mushu, and also provide the best bits of animation of Mushu on top of that. So it became not only a teaching job, but one where I had to output even more animation than I ever had, and that kind of a thing. And so at that point, I had to make a decision. And meanwhile, there was another supervising animator that was struggling also, and maybe more so than me, but we both got warned at the same time. And this is sort of the teaching moment I got out of that moment, was when we both were told the same thing, that we might lose our characters. And the other guy went the other direction. He said, well, you need to help me. You need to give me guidance. You need to tell me what to do. You need to hold my hand. I need more time. I need, this and this. And I did the opposite. I said, you got it. I'm going to do that. I'm going to stay all weekend and I'm going to do this animation test that's going to wow you guys. And I'm going to get it done before you ask for it. And it's going to be amazing. And I did that. I buckled down and I put in a couple weeks and created this animation test that was the best animation I had done at that point. And it worked. It little by little, they were like, oh, he can do it. Meanwhile, the other guy, he struggled. He went the other direction. He got defeated and he felt like he wasn't being supported enough. And that made him like not get things done on time. And when he did get them done, they kind of looked stiff and plain, and he didn't push himself and think out of the box. He went safe. And he's like, well, if this is what they're asking for, I'm going to give them just that. And I said, no, if I learned on Mushu. This is my turning point in my whole career was on Mushu, where I realized very quickly that don't give them what they ask for, give them what they want. Because every director out there thinks they have a vision, and they're just verbally saying it. They're not animating it or drawing it. You have to do that. So they're saying, I need this to happen, this happen, this happen. But if I can find a way to surprise them, come up with something that they hadn't even thought of yet, out of the box, then I knew that was job security, and it changed my animation career. It certainly changed my performance on Mushu, and became why that character really is probably the best character I've ever animated. Meanwhile, the other guy, he got let go. They fired him, and we were literally in the exact same situation. And he had less pressure. It was a smaller character in the film, but he crumbled under it, and it was sad to see. He was a good guy.
I love that. So where did that sense of courage, that sense of belief in self, that sense of, I got this, like, where did that come from?
I don't know exactly. I think it is God-given. And in this case, I guess in a way, I didn't even know I had it until that moment. I had, I guess, just getting into Disney, and, I kind of am overlooking some of that. The taking challenges happened years before, but this was the one where I really felt like it was a very conscious decision. Like, I can either crumble right now, or I can just, muster up what I need to do, and then just do it and tell them right up front and go, I'm going to do this.
Wow.
And you're going to see. And that part of it, I think it does come from, I'm very competitive, and I didn't realize it until that moment, I suppose. Yeah. But I've been competing with Tony, my whole life. And like I said, there were times in later high school and early Cal Arts where that got negative, and we were kind of, not nice to each other. But we've since, obviously matured, and that's become a more, we're not competitive in a negative way, I think. But anyway, I don't know where it came from, but I do feel like it was God that brought that to me, And oftentimes when I don't know what I'm going to do or what I'm going to say, the words that do come out and that are things that I wouldn't normally say, I know they didn't come from me. They came from God. So in this case.
So let's just stop right there and just say, like, our listeners and viewers, maybe there's something that you're dealing with right now that you've lost a sliver of confidence, or I want you to say, like, from Tom Bancroft himself, he's saying to you, like, take on the mindset. I got this. I got this. You guys, just that language, just the words, you're creating a higher level of consciousness in yourself. You're creating like your brainwaves to hear you say, I got this. I got this. Or whatever, or maybe you say, we got this. Like, we can do this. I've got this. But even just that decision, and then repeated in mantras. Like, I can't tell you how many times I say that when I'm up to big challenges. Like, Lisa, you can do this. You got this, girl. You got this, girl. And so it never goes away, that treating yourself and speaking to yourself that you can do this. Like, I was born for this, or this is divine inspiration, or I was called for just a time as this. I can do this. But this is something we have to tell ourselves, isn't it, Tom? It's something that we have to feed into our subconscious minds and in our conscious minds with discipline. Like, this is my mantra. I got this. I can do this.
And there's a flip side to that too, which is, and it's not necessarily a negative, but it can become a negative in that there's, that careful what you wish for, you might get it saying. My biggest fear and since this is about fear, I realized a little bit later on. So that was a success, right? I conquered it. I showed them I could do it. I did Mushu, and it turned out, and everybody was like, yay, all right, good job. But then fast forward a couple years later, and I had become this supervising animator. I was sort of the top of the heap. And this does lead into me leaving Disney. And I had sort of let that soak in too much. And now I was sort of, and I think that's pride. I think that there was a point where I just said, okay, I can do this, to the point where I start losing my edge. That can be the first thing that you can do, is like, okay, I can do this, to the point where I can do this in my sleep, and and once you make that transition where it's like, oh, this isn't so hard and this is pretty easy, what the thing you lose first is that edge, which is that me learning what I learned on Mushu, which was I got to think out of the box and find new ways every scene to challenge myself and push myself, but also surprise the directors and give them not what they asked for, but what they really want, and find what that mystery thing is that they forgot to communicate to me or didn't even know to ask for. And I gotten to the point where I was like, okay, I started losing that part of it. And so now fast forward a couple years later, and I started realizing that the competition and just trying to stay the top of the heap, I guess you could say, was starting to have a negative effect. And so what happened was I ended up one day getting a headache. And this was back in 2000, 1998, whatever. And I was working, I'd gotten to the point where I just said yes to everything. So Mulan had finished, and I was starting to work on an animation test for Roger Rabbit 2. It never happened, but I did this animation test. And out of the whole studio, they only asked me to do it. And so I was honored, of course, and it was a good opportunity. And so I said yes, and I did that. And then as I was doing that, they also said, oh, but can you also be the supervising animator on this animated short, John Henry? It's long come out, but I did Polly, the female lead, and I did character design on it. So I was doing that also at the same time. And I said yes to that. And then California came, and they were making Tarzan at the same time. And they said, out of all of the Florida studio, we have this one sequence that is a really choice sequence, and we want you, Tom Bancroft, to do it because you did so good on Mushu. We think you'd be perfect for this. And so I did that on overtime and weekends. And this was after doing a ton of, like a year's worth of overtime on Mushu, finishing that, now going right into having basically 2 jobs during the day and a third job, all for Disney, on Tarzan, on nights and weekends. And I said yes to everything because I was just like, I gotta stay at the top of the heap. And I was finally getting, I guess you could say, all the things I wanted out of Disney. Those days of being mentored and which were all great too. But I really, my goal was I want to, be this supervising animator. And I'd finally gotten there. And now I was just working all the time. And I wasn't seeing my family. And I was kind of obsessed with saying yes to everything and doing my best. And so what ended up happening was I got meningitis. I got a headache one day. And by the way, I've never had a headache before. This was my very first headache. And I went home, and my wife Jen called, and she said, "Why are you at home?" I said, "I'll go back, in the afternoon, but I had a headache this morning and it just hasn't gone away. And I just want to lay down and turn off all the lights." And she said, "I'm coming home right now." Because she knew what I didn't know. And because I kept going, "Oh, I'll be fine. I'll be fine." But she knew I'd never had a headache before, and that was extremely suspicious. And so sure enough, she took me into the hospital, and I was telling her the whole time, "I don't need to do this. I'm fine." And of course I get there, and they said it was meningitis. My brain was swelling. I had an infection. I had a sore throat, and that infection had gone into my brain. And so I could have died. I was in the hospital for a week. And when I came out of this is the short version, but when I came out of the hospital, this was the moment where I realized, and it took a little while to realize this slowly, that God had done that to wake me up. Because when I came back to Disney after that week or so, and I still had an IV in me, I was still going back to work with an IV in me because I just wanted to be back at work. But when I got back in, not the passion, I still loved animation, and I still wanted to do my best. But some of that competition and the negative part of it had really kind of gone away. I just, some of that drive to be on top and all that had kind of left me. I'd realized that I'd turned my back on my God and my family. And so having that wake up call of almost dying and seeing my wife in the hospital for a week, just, scared out of her mind, until they figured out what was really wrong with me. And it changed me. It did that shift that I don't think as people we can kind of do on our own. To me, those shifts, that kind of a turn where all of a sudden I am super passionate about something else entirely. And that came along when I got an email within a month of this. I got an email that was not even meant for me. It was meant for somebody else. It had been forwarded. And I saw this thing. It was a job posting for a small little company in Chicago called Big Idea Productions. And they made VeggieTales. And my kids watched VeggieTales. They were like these horrible little CG animated cartoons, but they were really funny.
We love them.
I know. And like many people out there have fond memories of VeggieTales with their kids. And I love that. So this was around, like I said, 1999 or so. And that job posting wasn't even for a job that I qualified for. It was like some computer tech job. But I got obsessed with it. Here I am at the best company in the world for animation. I'm at Disney Animation. I'm a supervising animator. And all I can think about is Big Idea Productions. I go to their website and I'm like reading every word and like, oh my gosh, like I've seen these cartoons before, but like I didn't really care about it. But now all of a sudden I care about it. And now I'm starting to want to work for them. And so I reached out to Phil Vischer, the creator of VeggieTales, and I said who I was and that this job wasn't for me, but do they have a need for somebody like me? And he immediately wrote back and he said, yes, we would love to have a Disney supervising animator here. We're making our first feature film, Jonah, and we'd love to have you be involved in that because we need people that have made feature films, and you have, and we don't have many of those people. And so I just, and it took a while, so I'm speeding it up. But I mean, in general, I had to come home to my wife a couple of weeks later after going back and forth. And I was telling her I was just talking to this guy, Phil Vischer at VeggieTales, and she thought that was neat at first. And then shortly, she started realizing I was kind of like serious about it. And I would go around to the people at work at Disney and go, have you heard about VeggieTales? And like, here's all about the company. And I'm telling them about Phil Vischer, and I'm telling them about like how he came up with it. And I just was obsessed with it all of a sudden, and I don't even know where it came from. And again, this is a God moment in my life where it took the meningitis. It took me to, I had to go to a place where I'd gotten to the top and I'd lost sight. Careful what you wish for. I'd gotten everything I wished for, but it wasn't bringing me joy because I think I had pulled away from the things that really were in my life for joy. It wasn't. That's the thing we got to all understand all the time is like success is great and all that, but if it comes at a price where you've given up your family and all those things and your God and your faith, it's not worth it. And so I've always, from that point on, I knew that I may die poor, but I'm going to die happy because I'm going to keep going. Yes. And I'm going to keep striving and hitting for the top because I'm that person. But I need to root it back to what's the most important thing. And that'll help you decide every decision in your life from that point on. And I have to still constantly remember that and go back to that moment and go, no, wait, this is, if somebody's offering me this gig, and this just happened this week, I have literally 8 projects going on at once. I'm looking over at my whiteboard that my wife just made for me.
I love that. So let's recreate that statement. So the statement is, instead of, I'll die poor, but I'll die happy. Let's recreate that statement to, I'll die following my passion.
Yeah.
And that's a rich life. And
you're
that
right.
could mean a ton of financial reality, or it could not.
It could. And honestly, some of the things that I'm pursuing now, we could get rich off of, to be honest. I'm pursuing things that I've never pursued before, and they're, and I'm very entrepreneurial. And so, that was a negative way to say that, but it does help me to go, and my wife has signed on for that. Jenna's always said, I just want us to be happy and have enough that the kids, are healthy and they have the things they need. Obviously, like any parent, that's what we want. And we've always had that. God has more than blessed us in that area. But I just, I guess what I'm saying. So anyway, what that led to was me going to Big Idea Productions, quitting my job at Disney. Nobody understood. Everybody at Disney, all my friends were like, oh, well, they must be making you a director and you're getting a ton of money. And I'm like, No, this is VeggieTales. They're a tiny little company in
And you
Chicago.
moved to Chicago from Florida.
I know. That was like the worst part. It was in Chicago. So yeah, we went from California, where we grew up, to Florida, hotter, and then to Chicago, the freezing cold. I've never seen four seasons. I'd never been in snow before. It was great and horrible at the same time.
Yeah.
Like Jen loved it, but I realized really quick, and that's why part of why we didn't stay. They ended up going bankrupt. So after about 2.5 years. And so it was very easy, even after that adventure, to kind of go, well, what was it all about? Why did God have us go there if it was just going to go bankrupt? And I didn't find that out until a couple years later. And so what ended up happening was they went bankrupt, but they were a skeleton crew, and they kind of kept going and making VeggieTales with a small group. And literally, I'd gone back to Disney just because I needed a job. And so I worked on Brother Bear and animated on that. And then I started my own company, Funny Pages Productions, out of my office in Florida. And I just did freelance for Disney and for other studios and other companies, and did children's books, and now illustrated over 50 children's books.
Wow.
Done like a ton of stuff. Character design. I wrote my own 2 characters art instruction books during that time, and they're bestsellers. So a lot of blessings through that time. But then I decided to move to Franklin, Tennessee. And here, this was like 2 years later. And who's the first person, like within a month, I found out that Big Idea was shutting down their Chicago offices and coming to Franklin, Tennessee. They literally were a mile away from me, and became, when I set up my first company with a friend of mine, they became our biggest client. Yeah. And so because I already had those relationships with them, they were friendships and things that I built, and because they all knew that I knew how to draw the VeggieTale characters and stuff, we got a ton of work for my own company. We became sort of their ancillary, studio, because when they didn't want to hire people, we were like, okay. So we designed for their second feature film. We designed all the new characters.
Wow.
We were a vital part of their operation for a while there. Yeah.
That's truly amazing. You are so divinely guided, and you just obeyed that calling, even when it didn't make sense. And then it made sense. Maybe not 2 weeks later or 2 months later. And it took 2 years later, but wow, does it make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. And I know God doesn't promise us to always show us why things are happening in their lives, right? Especially the bad things. He doesn't promise that we'll get those answers in our lifetime. I think we'll find them out in heaven. I really do. But in this case, he rewarded us and let us see why that happened, at least for us personally. Why we went to Chicago, why it really set us up in my own company when I came here to Franklin, Tennessee, and started my own company. And literally, they were our biggest client for years. And so
it's fantastic.
It's just, and they were all friends too. I mean, it was just a wonderful working relationship, and really kind of set us up, helped us buy our first house, and here in Tennessee anyway. And we've had many houses, but anyway, so that was like, there's really 2 kind of fear moments, I guess you could say. The biggest one was that move from, it wasn't a lot of fear going to Disney when I was young, right? Like I said, I didn't know the fear because it was just exciting, and it was a step up. But the fear moment of leaving that pinnacle and going to this tiny little company, and literally I took less money. I did. It was not a raise. It was not a job title. It was literally just, I want to use my abilities for God more directly. And this company, wants to help me do that. And so that was the whole reasoning behind it. It wasn't for money. And we were rewarded later for that, which was a true blessing. I
love it. Full circle. So they became your biggest client as you launched out on your own company. So let's talk about a gift that we can give to our listeners and viewers, because you have written several children's books, or co-wrote or helped write. But let's show the picture of the one that we're going to give away today, the mermaid.
So I also created the hashtag Mermay on Instagram. And so this was a project I did for Mermay. I wrote it and illustrated it. And this is called The Mermaid Who Wanted to Fly. It's a really kind of there's an analogy here about motivation, actually, about wanting to dream the impossible dream. Obviously, mermaids can't fly, but she wants to fly. And she does it by and it's all about how she's trying to discover how to do something that she can't do. And she does it through mentorship. She watches seagulls. She does it through, but then she has people that says, you're stupid. You can't do this. This is impossible. There's a pelican that tells her, he's the naysayer. And then she does it anyway. And then of course, in my world, my life, because it's faith-based, I don't want to give away the ending, but something divine happens that basically gives her the ability to do something she could never do. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I do think your listeners will enjoy it, even though it is a kid's book. It's kind of got an analogy there for everybody.
Yes, and everybody has a kid or a grandkid, so we love it. So how do they get their own copy? We're gifting 3 of them, right? I'm buying 3 of them from you, so we have 3 to give away. How do they win it, Tom Bancroft?
And do you realize you're crooked now?
Am I? Oh my gosh. Yeah. I know. Well, actually, I'm having a little challenge with my internet, but that's okay. I'm getting through it.
Yeah.
I'm filled with fear right now.
You're good right now, so be fearless.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom.
So all they have to do is I want you to be my friend. So I want you to follow me on Instagram and on Twitter. And in both cases, I'm Tom Bancroft, the number 1. Yeah. Tom Bancroft 1. In Twitter and on Instagram, and just be my friend. Hang out, follow me. Look, I post artwork more than photos because nobody wants to see a picture of me. They just want to see drawings. So that's what I found. I post a picture of me and the likes go way down. But if it's a drawing, they go up. So
okay, there's a good message there. All right, there's so Tom Bancroft 1. Everyone, go follow him and enjoy his talent and his posts. He's super funny, super talented. And the first 3 people who do that, I want you to post beneath this Fearless Fridays with Lisa show that you went ahead and did that. You follow Tom Bancroft 1 on Twitter and on Instagram, and you will get a free copy of his children's book. Awesome.
And you love it.
Tom, just thank you so much. I'm just so privileged to be your cousin, that I call you family. I think you're just an amazing man. I love that you are a family man, your 4 daughters, your wife, a long-term marriage with Jennifer, and just a beautiful contribution with your faith in God and Christ, and your talent and your sense of fun. Like when you hang out with Tom Bancroft, you will be laughing. I love your lightheartedness, and you are just a gem. Thank you for being on Fearless Fridays with Lisa.
I love you, Lisa, and you followers of Lisa are lucky to have her. She's a great person.
Thank you, Tom. All right. Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Bye for now.
Bye.